Back to Michigan, where defendant Michael Jackson-Bolanos will soon learn his fate after being charged in the stabbing death of community synagogue leader Samantha Woll just last year. Let's go back in now. It's the start of the defense's closing argument because we wanted to bring this to you in its entirety.
For almost a month to hear the testimony of the inquiry of who killed Samantha Woll. Now, I know that we've been here for almost a month, and that was the inquiry. However, that question was never answered by the prosecution. Now, they want to say that the defense had a particular theory of what happened. Yes, we have a theory of what happened. Just like they stated, this is their theory. Now, as a defense attorney, do I know exactly what happened to Samantha Woll? No, I don't. If I did, I would be sitting in that chair testifying during this trial saying, in fact, I saw exactly what happened to Samantha Woll, and this is what happened, A, B, and C. But unfortunately, I don't know exactly what happened. I can look at the evidence, I can use my common sense, and come to a conclusion that I know for a fact that Mr. Michael Jackson-Bolanos had nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the death of Samantha Woll. Now, throughout this case, I believe it was stretched dramatically. Half of the case, the prosecutor used to defend Jeff Herbstman, instead of showing you evidence that would implicate if Michael Jackson-Bolanos committed this murder. And why was he didn't do that? Because he did not have evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that in fact Mr. Michael Jackson-Bolanos killed Samantha Woll. This particular case, he states, is circumstantial. This case involves the wrong person who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. We first heard from Kevin Mull, who was their witness. He testified that at first he couldn't even see the body from 40 or 50 yards away. He didn't even know it was a body until he got much closer. Prosecution wants to imply that, oh, this scene was lit up so much, you would have been able to see Samantha Woll from space. Their own witness stated he couldn't even see it. He didn't even see or notice the blood at all. He states that he did touch the body. He touched an exposed part of her back. He then went back to his wife. They called 911. He was then asked to do CPR, and he stated in his mind he did not think CPR would be necessary because she was already dead, from his opinion. Now asked whether or not there was blood on his clothes, he said he doesn't believe so. Now, did he actually check? Was his clothes actually analyzed? Had his clothes been analyzed, would we find trace amounts of blood on his sleeve or on his elbow? We don't know, because that was not done. We asked Detective Sanchez about whether or not blood or clothing is analyzed from an individual, and he stated there was no reason, if a responding person or caller of 911 touches the body, there's no reason to believe that there should be blood or analyze this particular clothing. But what do we have? We have a contradiction. Officer Dowd testified that in his report, he stated that nobody touched the body, and he spoke to Kevin Mull. Now, I'm not saying that Kevin Mull is a liar, but you have two inconsistent statements about whether or not somebody touched the body, which Detective Sanchez said would be grounds in order to analyze that clothing to see if there was blood on that particular clothing. If you have two inconsistent statements, one from a responding individual and 2 from a responding officer who stated that nobody touched the body. He also stated that Samantha's door was open. We saw a picture of the body cam showing that Samantha's door was open, wide open. I don't contest that. In fact, her door had to be open. How would she get outside? She can't walk through doors. She had to open the door at least a little bit in order to go outside. He also stated that her arms were to her chest and that he himself was trained in CPR, and based upon his experience, he opined that if somebody were to try to check her pulse, it is very possible that, in fact, their arm could make contact with her body. She was laying there. Her blood was on her clothes, saturated. Blood on her hair. It is very possible if an individual is going to check her pulse on her neck, that their sleeve would make contact with her hair. Their sleeve could make contact with the back of her clothing and transfer blood from her to their garment. Officer Q, he testified and tried to convince us that, in fact, he arrived to the scene at 6:38, even though his body cam shows him at 6:49 and 53 seconds inside of his car. Now, one may say this is inconsequential on exactly what time he got there, but I suggest that this was a pattern. This was a pattern of law enforcement officers either making false statements about what they did in part of the investigation or not doing in a thorough investigation. Now, I walked Officer Q to this particular point and asked him, Officer Q, you see your body cam. It states 6:49, roughly 6:50, you're still in the car, correct? He said, correct. There's no reason to believe that your body cam was not calibrated for the correct time, correct? Correct. And then I say, Officer Q, you got to the scene at 6:50, right? He said, no, got there at 6:38. In fact, and despite the evidence that's presented in front of him, he denies he got there at 6:50, a pattern. We next heard from Detective Zhu, who indicated that in his opinion, there was evidence of a struggle, which the prosecutor fails to show you this particular clip, of a fruit bowl knocked over in the kitchen, fruit on the floor, that would suggest that this particular altercation originated in the kitchen. Now, how could it originate in the kitchen if she's laying asleep on the couch? At some point in time, she would have to get up from the couch, if she was sitting on the couch, go to the kitchen, and that's when the struggle started. He also tried to convince himself and us that, in fact, he tampered with evidence. He convinced himself that he removed her credit cards from her wallet and transferred them to a whole different area of this particular apartment and put them on the table. When I asked him, does that make sense for you to do that? He said, no, it doesn't make sense. And it had to be back and forth before he finally realized or came to the conclusion and admitted that, in fact, okay, maybe I did not do that. We have her purse, we have her car keys in plain view when you walk into the apartment. As soon as you walk into the apartment. Had this been a larceny, an attempted robbery, that's the first thing somebody's going to notice, is the keys and the purse. We know he has a history of cars. Now, if he wanted to steal her car, her key is right there. This has a panic button on the key. So if individual didn't know what her car was, they would be able to hit the alarm on there or the unlock button of this particular remote and get a signal from the car, in fact, what car that this particular key is associated with. laptops, credit cards, money. Nothing's taken. Forensic Tech Carrington Sheridan. Now, she testified that this is possible suspected blood. Do we know for sure what it is? No, we don't, because we have no pictures at all of the basement floor. And we know that the forensic techs, they weren't just on their own direction of what they did. They were being directed by the officers in charge at the particular scene of what pictures to take, what evidence to collect. Now, why wasn't this particular sink photographed? Why wasn't the floor photographed? I don't know. I would suggest that this was a lack of being thorough in their investigation. There was evidence of blood going down the steps, but then we have no pictures. We have no pictures next to the steps leading there. How do we know if there are other blood spots on the floor? We just have to assume that they're not, just because of the tremendous amount of blood that was associated upstairs? Do we know that? Detective Zhao also indicated that there was evidence of a disturbance of drawers on the very top floor to insinuate that possibly somebody went upstairs. Do we know that? I don't know. Forensic Tech Carrington Sheridan also testified that the blood outside appeared to be wet. The blood inside appeared to be somewhat dry. What would that, to a person with common sense, indicate? That the blood outside was transferred at a later time than the blood that was inside. We know that the blood inside was classified by Jody Johnson as being a pool of blood. A pool of blood is a copious amount of blood that is accumulated in one particular place over a particular time. And this blood had an opportunity to dry by the time the forensic techs arrived to the scene, because this particular blood that was inside was transferred at a much earlier time than the blood outside. She also stated that there was a suspected struggle in the living room. Why do we think that? Joni Johnson also stated that. We have the pillow that's on top of the blood. That means that the blood was accumulated on the floor prior to the pillow being knocked on top of the blood, which would suspect that there was some type of struggle to knock that pillow off and for it to land on top of the blood. Now, we also heard from their neighbor, James Griffin. He testified that he doesn't remember or doesn't acknowledge hearing somebody scream. However, that's not what he said on the night of. We know for a fact that he was trying to convince himself that, in fact, he did not hear the assault of Samantha Woll. Said he went outside around 1:20ish to walk his dog. He says he routinely goes out there around 12:30. This particular night was an hour later. He heard a very distinction of a woman originally screaming, saying, don't hit me no more. Don't stab me. A direction from the Joliet area. He never said anything about sound bouncing off of buildings. He never said anything about thinking it was somebody striking. He stated that he was feeling guilty for the last 24 hours, feeling callous for the last 24 hours because he knew in his heart. And then he tried to deny he said that. But then when confronted with the truth, he had to admit, but he wanted to explain it. It was obvious from his passion and his emotions on the body-worn camera what he actually felt. He also stated that the walls are so thin in these apartments that he just assumed it was somebody else's responsibility. It wasn't his responsibility, and it was eating him alive. And if anybody can reassure to him that he did not hear what he knows, what we know he heard, he can sleep better. It makes him sleep better at night, knowing that he could have done something. He could have maybe went there, called the police. She could have received medical aid much sooner than when she collapsed outside and when Mr. Hull found her. She would have been able to have medical attention around 1:20, 1:30. We wouldn't be here right now. We definitely wouldn't be here with an innocent man being accused of a murder he did not commit had she got that particular aid when she was originally assaulted. We then heard from Paul Spurgeon. What did he say? In regard to Samantha Woll, she did not sleep on her new couch since moving into Joliet. She also slept in T-shirts. She was miserable trying to make a relationship with Jeff Herbstman work. We know that Samantha Woll was not found in a T-shirt. She was found in sweatpants in a jacket with a hood to it. Not sleepwear. Not something that you would put on if you were preparing to go to sleep coming from a wedding, especially if you never slept on that particular couch. Why would you be on the couch? Was she waiting for somebody? Did she travel home with somebody? We don't know. Everyone told Samantha to get rid of Jeff Herbstman. We also know that she went to Utah to clean him out of her system. But after she returned from Utah, she was still in contact. Paul Spurgeon confronted her about that. He expressed his feelings as a friend to her about, why are you still dating this guy? You told me you were going to Utah to get rid of him, but you're still dating him? We know that Samantha Woll was also self-conscious about things. So she didn't want the criticism. She wouldn't keep telling Paul that, in fact, she was still involved with Jeff Herbstman after he confronted her about it. We saw that type of behavior in regards to Robert Becker. He testified that she never told her parents that she was sexually active with him because he was not Jewish. And the type of criticism that she would receive from her parents for dating somebody and having a sexual relationship, even though they had sexual chemistry, because he's not Jewish. She was also self-conscious about a lack of employment at that particular time. She also uses heart emojis with everyone, well, almost everyone. He stated that she sent a heart emoji at 1 o'clock to a David Wilkinson. Also, Aaron Pergament was out of her league. He would want a relationship. He called her all of the time. Stated that he was, quote unquote, in sales. Was very aggressive with his communication with her on the frequency on which he called. Paul Spurgeon said it could have been due to just the nature of his employment. We don't know. Now, Jeff Herbstman, the individual which the prosecutor put his defense hat on in order to try to convince us that Jeff Herbstman is innocent. He wouldn't harm a soul. What do we know about Jeff Herbstman? He admitted to being a pragmatist, meaning that he operates in a very methodical and analytical way. He also stated, contrary to what the prosecutor said, he stated himself, he had motive. He had opportunity. And he was trying to outsmart individuals, a.k.a. i.e. the police. The motive. Samantha Woll broke up with him. He was upset about that. And not only did she break up with him, she rejected him multiple times. He stepped out of his comfort zone, out of his bubble, to change certain character traits that he exhibited. He analyzed himself and said, hey, I have these particular flaws in me. I'm going to correct those flaws in an attempt to win Samantha Woll's heart over.
All right, so are you buying this? I mean, he's doing a fantastic job, I think, of pointing out all the things in this case, and there are a lot of them that point away from the defendant.
I think he is, and I think the problem is the prosecution had a lot to say to point to the defendant. The defense has a lot to say to point against the defendant or against the state. I think the jury's not going to be able to convict this guy.
The problem is he took the stand, and it really becomes about him at that point.
Yeah,
so that could be a problem if you buy his story or not with him on the stand. All right, we'll take a break. We'll have more from inside that courtroom when we return. Keep it here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Go with the general.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ashley Wilcott here with Michael Ayala, and I must say we hadn't been together for a week, so it's nice to be. It has been a minute. A lot of big stuff that we're covering here together. We continue with our coverage of the synagogue leader murder trial in Michigan. The defendant, Michael Jackson-Bolanos, is charged with murdering Samantha Woll.
Now, she was a synagogue leader who was found stabbed to death outside of her home back in October of 2023. However, the defense claims that Woll's ex-boyfriend might actually be the real killer. All right, let's get you back into court now for more of the defense's closing argument.
She rejected him. How would that make him feel? Not happy. Certainly not happy, especially when he finds out that she's dating multiple individuals and in his mind feels that he's smarter than them. They don't compare to him. Aaron Pergamon doesn't compare to Jeff Herbstman. We saw Aaron Pergamon. We saw Jeff Herbstman. Aaron Pergamon is, between me and you, he is out of her league. He's much older. He's friends with her parents. Now, how would that make him feel? He doesn't receive emojis. Paul Spurgeon said everybody gets these heart emojis, except Jeff Herbstman. He said he doesn't get them. How would that make you feel? Your girlfriend sending heart emojis to everybody else except you? Even despite your attempts to win her heart over? The opportunity. Absolutely, he had the opportunity. Because he was trying to outsmart individuals. He leaves his phone at home. He can walk there. He's an avid walker and runner. He's an avid bicyclist. Now, why didn't the detectives know anything about this prior to me asking these questions on cross-examination? Their lack of doing a thorough investigation, even though they want to give this impression that they left no stone unturned. But I surmise to say that there are a lot of stones that were left unturned, not even looked at, such as any stones that have been in the fire pit. I don't think they knew anything about this fire pit until I asked about this fire pit. Then all of a sudden, yeah, we knew about this fire pit, but we don't know whether or not there's any remains of clothing in this fire pit, any use of accelerants in this fire pit, any acknowledgement that this fire pit exists, any photographs of this fire pit, no knowledge of a bonfire, which was testified by Paul Spurgeon and Jeff Herbstman, no evidence whatsoever. When he was arrested, already had a criminal defense lawyer. Already had one when he talked to the police. Called his parents. And the police were very nice to him. Very nice to him. And we saw the the difference in how Mr. Jackson-Bolanos was treated versus how Mr. Herbstman was treated. Oh, would you like me to call your parents? Oh, would you like any snacks, anything to drink? Just very pleasurable, very cordial with them. Now, I'm not saying that they should have just been treating him like Mr. Jackson-Bolanos and calling him, you know, Jackson-Bolanos that same type of respect. However, his father tells him, don't say anything. Don't talk to the police. Mother doesn't even ask why he's there. He calls the police, and what mother doesn't ask why you are in the police station? What happened? What are they saying? What are they arrested you for? I mean, some type of questions would be warranted for somebody who cares about you, especially if they got a defense lawyer for you already. Now, I believe that Jeff Herbstman, he told his parents prior to him smoking marijuana, becoming very paranoid, along with any other drugs he was probably taking, such as mushrooms, and then a combination of who knows what else, that led to a guilt-stricken paranoia where he just could not control his emotions at that particular time, and they just burst out, and he could not control himself. His parents probably said, wait, the lawyer right now, she's out of town or something like that. Don't do anything rash. He went there and started smoking and think about it. And he suggests that, he convinced himself. But we don't. What else we know? We know prior to him calling 911, he thought about and started to worry about whether or not he brought the correct clothes to Kalamazoo. So what does that tell us? That means he had to first be analytical and think about, what he brought to...
All right, still with us, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor Franz Borghardt. All right, Franz, I feel like he's doing a fantastic job. I have to admit he has a lot to work with here, but he's organizing his argument in a way that I think is very understandable or relatable for this jury.
I love me some Brian Brown. I love it. And look, at the end of the day, no matter what the jury does, this defendant got an exceptionally good defense. He's using the same thing both sides are saying, common sense arguments as to why, one, someone else had the motive and opportunity to kill this innocent woman, frankly, because she just didn't want to be with him. And look, it doesn't hurt that he also has a confession to work with, right? So I think he's doing everything he can. He's doing all the right things, Michael. And look, like I said, this is an exceptionally good defense, and he does have some great things to work with. You know, no matter what the jury does, he's done what he's supposed to do.
Yeah. All right, so does it really matter what he's saying or what the state's saying when the defendant himself has testified? Michael mentioned, you know what, it's whether or not you believe the defendant. Do you agree with that, Franz, that at the end of the day, that's what they really look to?
I think they're going to really scrutinize the defendant, and I think they're going to have an issue with the fact of which lies do we believe, which lies do we not believe,
the lies
because they're
are the
true.
Problem.
You know, the common phrase we use down here is half-truths or whole lies. And in a rebuttal, I would emphasize, what do you want? What are you supposed to believe? Like, what lies are you supposed to believe? And I think that's the problem for the defense. But I will say, Judge, I absolutely think in this case he needed to testify. And if he's acquitted, it's probably because he testified. So it's a double-edged sword to be sure, but you know, look, that's the problem, that's the risk, but he had nothing to lose.
Yeah, I think it was a good risk as well. One last quick question for you, Franz. I think a lot of this case, as many cases, will be determined by who is on that jury. And the reason I say that is in terms of believing some of the most important parts of his story, why he wouldn't call 911, why he didn't want to go to police, those types of things. I think certain people on that jury may buy that story, because that is a story that can be told by certain members of society, people on the fringes, et cetera, people in certain minority groups. They have those concerns. So I think it does matter a lot in this particular case, who is on that jury.
If I can't walk an inch in the accused's shoes, I'm certainly not going to walk a mile, and I'm certainly not going to acquit him. That being said, you need to have jurors on this case that can differentiate a criminal who does crimes of opportunity, who steals things, from someone who would take the next leap and kill someone. And I think it goes back to, Michael, and it goes back to this point, whoever killed this woman, it was up close, it was personal, and it certainly lends itself to the argument that it wasn't him, but instead a scorned ex. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree. This case won or lost in jury selection.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we do need to squeeze in a break. When we come back, of course, we're going to go back inside for more of the closing arguments. Right now, the defense, we paused it. We'll take you back.
A-list actor Alec Baldwin is cast in the real-life role he never wanted.
I turn it up because the gun goes off.
Criminal defendant.
The Alec Baldwin manslaughter trial. Live coverage today, only on Court TV.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, diving deeper into the case against Alec Baldwin. Plus, Soraya Ong Harmon has been found. Her grandmother joins us live with the very latest.
Closing Arguments, tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
We're in Michigan, where defendant Michael Jackson-Bolanos will soon learn his fate after being charged in the stabbing death of community synagogue leader Samantha Woll last year.
And we want to get you right back into court now for more of the defense's closing argument, right where we left off.
He could have brought to Kalamazoo, and how that would be perceived by individuals who were looking at what he wore. So he had time to think about this. He also had time to think about whether or not he would get along with his program director. So he had to think about possible conversations of what could have been spoken about between him and his program director, possible conclusions to that particular conversation, and what could have happened to him based upon his conclusions on how this conversation could or could not go. So he had to be methodical and analytical about that. Also, before he called 911, he removed all his property from his hotel room. He knew he was going to jail. He didn't have a delusion of where he was at. He knew exactly where his room was at. He didn't go and walk to the corner store and say, hey, give me my clothes. He went up to his room. He knew exactly where he was at. He then went down to his car and placed those clothes in the car. He wasn't having a delusion. He knew exactly where his car was located at. He knew where his phone was located at. He didn't go down and take his clothes and just throw them on the ground. He didn't throw them at the front desk and say, here are your clothes back. He was not having a delusion. He was told to say that. Very convenient for him to admit to killing Samantha Woll, and then conveniently, I was having a delusion because I took the wrong dosage. And my psychiatrist told me that that's a possibility. Where's the psychiatrist? We've heard from every expert that they could bring to try to substantiate what they wanted to put forth as their theory. Where's the psychiatrist? Where's an expert that can testify that, yes, he was taking this particular medication, and these are some of the side effects, or could be a side effect of his medication for him to admit to murder? No. Just like he was analytical and thinking about whether or not he brought the right attire to Kalamazoo, he thought about the murder. He relived the murder in his mind, and he relived it. He knew exactly what he did. He knew exactly what he did. And that's why he told the police, I'm in trouble. Because he knew exactly where he was at. He knew exactly who he just called. And he knew exactly who he was speaking to when he said he is in trouble. Then when he was taken to the police station, he knew exactly where he was at. The officer came in and told him, do you know why you're here and what's going on? He said, yes, I'm being detained. Do you know why? Yes. The officer said, good, as long as you know. Now, he didn't think he was at the zoo. He didn't think he was at home in his bed. He wasn't having a delusion on where he was at. He knew exactly where he was at and why he was there based upon his statements to the police. He was worried about his job. He was in that delusion. He knew he had a job. He knew he had a job that he could lose and probably would lose based upon what he just admitted to the police. Now, The police, they didn't badger him. They didn't ask any additional questions. So we have no more follow-up. We don't have an interrogation. He wasn't interrogated. He said he wanted to talk to his lawyer, even though he didn't know who his lawyer was, so that the police didn't ask him any more questions. Even though he said, quote unquote, I'm trying to be helpful. You're trying to be helpful. Why don't we have a subsequent interview after you being arrested? Because his lawyer swooped in, and his lawyer said, don't say anything. He had a delusion, and they bought it. You had a delusion to make you say you did something that you know, that quote unquote, that you know you didn't do? When does that ever happen? He said it never happened before. He's never convinced himself that he allegedly did something that didn't happen. No, absolutely not. He knew exactly what happened. And he knew he was going to lose his job. And he told his parents to say that he was not in jail, but that he was having a mental breakdown. Lied to them. Even though he was trying to be helpful. Now, they want to say that, oh, this is a seatbelt cutter. This is a knife. This is a knife. It's a blade. Now, why wasn't this blade submitted to forensic tech Synagogue in order for her to do her trace analysis? Why wasn't the fibers even collected from this particular knife, let alone submitted to Synagogue in an attempt to see, A, whether or not the fibers that were contained in this knife actually could match the fibers that were removed from Samantha Woll's clothes? Why wasn't this particular knife submitted to forensic tech Synagogue in an attempt to see whether or not this particular knife could have caused some of the wounds or some of the cuts on Samantha Woll's clothes? Why wasn't this particular knife submitted to forensic tech Synagogue? This is a characteristic knife. It has a straight edge, a single edge, which could be consistent with the cuts to Samantha Woll's clothing. But we don't know because it was never submitted. But they want you guys to think they did a thorough investigation. No stone is left unturned. This knife was never submitted. We have multiple pictures of Samantha Woll throughout Jeff Herbstman's apartment. Now, we saw inside of Samantha Woll's apartment, and you will be able to see from exhibit number 10, the pictures of her walls. Not one picture of Jeff Herbstman. Not one picture of Samantha Woll and Jeff Herbstman. Jeff Herbstman goes from room to room, being reminded of Samantha Woll, looking at these pictures. We don't know what's on the back of these pictures. I mean, I'm not suggesting that there is, but could be some language on the back of the pictures. A plethora of prescription medication that who knows what the results of what combination he was taking. We have a bag of whatever type of pills that's not in the prescription, that's technically illegal to have pills out of their prescription bottle. This wasn't analyzed. We don't know what type of pills those are. We have mushrooms that he's taking in combination with a plethora of prescription medication. We have a bike that we know Mr. Herbstman is an avid bicyclist. Why wasn't this bike analyzed? Why wasn't it a closer picture of this bike? Did they even know Jeff Herbstman rode a bike? Why do I have to flush these out? Do we know what Jeff Herbstman was wearing on the day of October 21st? No. He indicated he went to the synagogue. Why wasn't anybody interviewed from the synagogue to see what he had? Why wasn't video extracted from the synagogue to see if Jeff Herbstman was even there and what he was wearing? Detective Sanchez indicated, had he known what Jeff Herbstman was wearing, then yes, they would have went and tried to locate that same clothing from his house and analyzed it. And why did they know what he was wearing? Because it was not a thorough investigation. Stones were left unturned. Now, as far as his location, Where was Brian Tosis at with his nice map to show that, oh, we know that he was at this particular location? Where was Cheryl Markle at to say, oh, I analyzed his phone and these are his phone records that would indicate he was listening to a podcast? Where's that evidence at that night? Now, his phone may very well have been tuned to a podcast, but he was in there listening to it. But yet we don't have that information at all, even though they spent all of this time trying to convince us that Jeff Herbstman didn't do the murder. He put on his defense hat and he went to work to try to convince us that Jeff Herbstman could not have done it simply because his phone wasn't there? Is that it? Because your phone is not there? We heard from Sergeant Martinez, who indicated in his search warrant affidavit, he even stated that individuals leave their phones at home in order to detect their phone being located prior to committing a crime. We have gloves. They try to make fun of the fact that Mr. Jackson-Bolanos said he had a seatbelt cutter, but they didn't make any mention. They didn't ask any questions about Jeff Herbstman's seatbelt cutter, a lead seatbelt cutter. I don't know if during their preparation, the prosecutor, his attorney, and him, during their preparation, maybe that was not brought up. But Jeff Herbstman did testify, and it was obvious that he was giving suggestions on what to say. Not just the truth, say these things. Say you were delusional. Say you don't remember. Say whatever you do, don't say the truth that you killed her. Don't say what you already told the police. They gave him use immunity. And what is use immunity? Use immunity means that no statement that he states on the stand can be used against him. He has immunity against that. So if he got on the stand and said, yes, I did kill him, I want to finally come clean and clear my conscience, they would not be able to use that statement against him. But why not give him transactional immunity? If you really believe he's so innocent, why not give him transactional immunity, which means that we cannot prosecute you at all during this case for the death of Samantha Woll, period. And you know why? Because I think they deep down may have had some reservations on how sincere Mr. Herbstman was when he tried to recant his statement. It's like, why would somebody admit to something they didn't do? And the search of his house was done on November the 8th, weeks after the death of Samantha Woll. He could have disposed of whatever type of evidence he had. Burnt it, threw it in the trash, drove up to Kalamazoo and threw it on the dump. I mean, he could have did anything with it. They didn't search his house then, on the day afterwards, and they'd be like, oh, we didn't have any probable cause. He had individuals who testified or told the law enforcement that he was depressed and he was not all the way there mentally, and they had concerns about Jeff Herbstman's mental status. Police officer Allison Baker stated, Jeff Herbstman said, I killed her. Despite the prosecution trying to, I guess, somewhat impeach her, she told the truth. Now, I can't say the same for all of their witnesses, or even most of their witnesses, but she was honest and she told the truth despite. She didn't have to look at the prosecutor for approval and see if he was shaking his head like, yeah, say this, or shaking her head. We saw that. We saw the prosecutor.
We need to take a break. We'll get you back to more closing arguments when Court TV returns.
A-list actor Alec Baldwin is cast in the real-life role he never wanted.
I turn comfortable and the gun goes off.
Criminal defendant.
The Alec Baldwin manslaughter trial. Live coverage today, only on Court TV.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, diving deeper into the case against Alec Baldwin. Plus, Soraya Ong Harmon has been found. Her grandmother joins us live with the very latest.
Closing Arguments, tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. Michael Ayala here with Judge Ashley Wilcott. We are continuing our coverage in the synagogue leader murder trial.
Defense attorney Brian Brown is delivering his closing argument. Let's get you back inside court where we left off.
What witnesses testify, trying to signal to the witnesses on how to testify. Similarly, when Jeff Herbstman was testifying, kept looking to the prosecutor, kept looking to his attorney in the back row, looking for approval on what to say, not just answering the questions. And then when confronted, what did he say? You got me. No, I'm not trying to get you. I'm trying to get the truth. We're trying to get to the truth. My job is not to get you. That's the police's job, to investigate who did this and come to a conclusion. And if the evidence shows, which I believe it does, you had some type of involvement with it, then they arrest you, and then they charge you, and then you go to court and fight for your rights. Now, Aaron Pergamon testified, lied about having a key, lied about being sexually active. There was some type of mention that at one point in time he was a stalker. Now, Sergeant Martinez testified that he felt that Aaron Pergamon lied to Officer Crenshaw when Aaron Pergamon said he did not have a key to Samantha Woll's apartment. Put that in his search warrant. He testified to that. Now, Aaron Pergamon knew that there was a criminal investigation being conducted. Why wasn't Aaron Pergamon charged with lying to a peace officer when they had proof of it, had text messages? Stockmeyer tried to walk it back and say, oh, it's probable cause, but not this or that, or I don't recall, or just didn't want to tell the truth of the matter. And I think that Sergeant Martinez stated the truth. Even though he did not take pictures of the inside of Jeff Herbstman, he was truthful about that. He didn't take pictures. He was truthful about he didn't thoroughly examine it. Now, the ADT, Jesse Conwell, testified that at least 2 minutes for the system to go into idle mode, stated that the motion at 4:20 a.m. had to be brief in order for the system to then go into idle mode at 4:22. We know that there was motion that was detected at 12:32 in the a.m., and from 12:32 to 1:24, there had to be constant motion because the system never went into idle mode for this period of time. For almost an hour, there was constant motion. They also indicated that, for the prosecutor, they stated that, oh, if she was on the couch, the system wouldn't detect it. So therefore, the system would go into motion from 12:32 to 1:24. There had to be some type of constant motion between 12:32 and 1:24 to prohibit the system to going into motion. And then the system goes into idle mode at 1:24. Dr. Krum, she testified. Now, some of her testimony was a little bit disingenuous, and I'm going to tell you why. Because, for one, in her autopsy, which you'll get a copy of that, she did not document the depth of the wounds. She also did not indicate the smaller arteries or vessels were severed at all. Why is that important? She testified on June 13th, the same day after Dr. Dragovich provided his report. Now, of course, both sides had to get an opportunity to look at these reports. The prosecution then looks at this report, sees the deficiencies in her autopsy, and tries to rehabilitate her on the stand by asking poignant questions, which Dr. Dragovich points out in his report about what she didn't do. So he then asks her the depth of the wounds on the stand, and she just makes up these numbers. She just makes up these numbers. They weren't documented, they weren't measured, but in an attempt to show or try to prove and mislead you guys that she did a thorough investigation or a thorough autopsy, she just says these numbers. She also has nowhere in the autopsy report that's any indication that there was any arteries or vessels that were severed at all. That was also in the report. That question was asked, trying to rehabilitate her. No defensive wounds. Also stated that these bruises could have came from punches. She has a bloody nose. Why does she have a bloody nose? Why is there blood in her nose? Did she get hit in the nose? According to the autopsy, we don't know because it was not thorough. Bruises on the side of her head. The prosecutor wants to say that this was a terminal fall, but she got bruises all over her body. Also, we have evidence of a struggle prior to the bloodletting in the living room. How do you get bruises on the inside of your arm? Is that conducive with somebody trying to grab your arm? To try to control your arm? Is it? More bruising. More bruising. She got bruises all on her body. Now, this particular image is rather important because, for one, this would suggest that somebody was over her, on top of her, to strike her in the back of the head, I believe she was stabbed first in the throat, stabbed 3 times in the neck. She then fell down or bent down on her knees. Somebody then came over top of her to hit her in the back of the head. This is a crime of passion. She wasn't a threat at that particular time. Somebody had the distinct intent to murder her, to stab her in the back of the head, to stab her in the back of the neck. Dr. Dragovich indicated that these wounds would indicate that there could be a loss of consciousness and then a later possible regaining of that consciousness. Stated that she had an incomplete autopsy. Autopsy report did not make any mention of whatsoever that there was a severance of any major blood vessels, could mean that that person could survive for hours. There was no indication of what was the final thing that killed her at what particular or when that could have happened. Based upon his reading of the autopsy, he could say that it's very possible that she could have been stabbed, assaulted much earlier, lost consciousness in the hallway, in the pool of blood, and then regained consciousness some time later, triggered the motion, and then went outside. No wounds that were indicated as far as their deaths. Stab wound to the back of the head possibly resulted in a loss of consciousness.
All right, we'll step aside here, take a break. We're going to hit that pause button. We'll get you back to court on the other side, so keep it here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Today. I'm Matt Johnson in Santa Fe, New Mexico, covering the Alec Baldwin manslaughter trial. This is Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ashley Wilcott.
And I'm Michael Ayala. We're continuing to follow the synagogue leader murder trial in Michigan. Michael Jackson-Bolanos is accused of killing Samantha Woll in October of last year.
He claims that he found her body, but that he did not kill her. The jury has gone home for the day and will begin deliberations tomorrow morning.
Now, we've been catching you up on closing arguments throughout the day. We've hit the pause button. So let's get you back to court now as the defense continues presenting its final case to the jury.
Any compromise to the respiratory system with an analysis of the lung tissue sampling, but did note that there was hemoaspiration, but also noted that the respiratory system was unremarkable, which means normal. That's a contradiction. Like, which one is it? The toxicologist indicated that, yes, she had GHB, and GHB is a substance that could be found in all of us. But she also indicated that GHB has a half-life of 30 to 50 minutes. if she were to inject GHB, say around 12:30, 1 o'clock, and she died at 4 o'clock, that would give some opportunity for her body to metabolize. Now, I'm not saying I know 100% that somebody gave her a Mickey, but these are questions that we have to ask. And she also indicated that based upon the substances that are in her body, it could lower her blood pressure, which could lead out to a lower rate of which somebody bled out. Now, this is the inside of Samantha's car. What substance is this in a cup? Is this blood? Is it suspected blood? I don't know. Was it analyzed? We don't know. We have no evidence that suggests that this has ever been analyzed. Now, Detective Sanchez indicated that if it was, he would have known about it, but he didn't even know what forensic tech even did the analysis at all. And then the prosecution wants to suggest that us as the defense, we could have had this car processed with our own experts. We could have, like it's our job. We have to process the scene. We have to send people to the scene to process her car and her apartment to see whether or not this is suspected blood. No, this is their job. Why wasn't this particular substance analyzed to see what it was? Is that GHB? I don't know. It's something inside of a cup, inside of the car. We have other cups. Did she have a rider in the car? Was somebody else in the car? We don't know. Was these cups analyzed for any traces of DNA inside of the cup? We do not know. We have no pictures whatsoever of outside of the car. Now, Special Agent Bowers, he testified about telling the story. He likes to tell the story. But in order to tell the story, you must go from its original nature of the story. The original nature of the story was her purse, her keys, plain view when you walk inside the house. The edited story is the purse is then moved to the kitchen table. So when he gets there, he's looking at a totally different story than the original story. The original story was this purse was in this particular location. Nothing was taken. Obviously, things are of value in plain view. Laptops, wallets, car keys, credit cards, money. If this was a robbery, this would have not been in this picture. It would have been taken. They want to suggest that Mr. Jackson-Bolanos is such an opportunity that he doesn't pass up any type of opportunity to take anything. But you don't take somebody's purse. You don't take their car keys. You don't take laptops. You don't take money. You don't take credit cards. You take these things if this is a robbery. So the story that this is telling me is this is not a robbery. Whoever came to do this Samantha Woll had no intention whatsoever to rob her. They didn't come to rob her. They came to kill her. Drawers unransacked. If somebody's coming to your house to do an armed robbery, they are ransacking that place. There's nothing that's not going to be left. That table will be empty. Those drawers will be pulled inside out. The TV would be gone. There would be some type of documentation or some type of evidence that would suggest that somebody was ransacking this place, and it's none. The only type of things that it suggests is that there was some type of struggle. That's the only evidence that shows things being knocked around. They suggest there was a struggle, not somebody trying to ransack the place, snoop through the place, see what they can find to steal. Detective Marco. She stated that our phones show us everything. Cellbrite gives us the information on what's in your phone. We have Mr. Jackson-Bolanos' phone on the left. What do we notice that's similar to Samantha Woll's phone? Mr. Jackson-Bolanos has his location services enabled. Find My iPhone enabled. And for those who don't know or have an iPhone, In order to find your iPhone, you must have your location enabled. And that's a feature. If you lose your iPhone, it will give you on the map where your phone was last located. As far as a GPS coordinate in a dot. Not a time-advanced phone record, which is not as thorough as a GPS location. We have Samantha Woll's GPS location. And why do we have Samantha Woll's GPS location? Because her phone location services were enabled. Her Find My iPhone was enabled. Why don't we have Mr. Jackson-Bolanos? They both had an iPhone. They both had their location enabled. Why don't we have any GPS for Mr. Jackson-Bolanos at all? We just have time-advanced records that place them in the location. But we can place hers exactly where her phone was at. Even though nobody took the time to input these particular coordinates and give it to you on the map, because they love their maps. They have multiple maps through the course of this particular trial. Why wouldn't they map this? This is a different variable. Now, the prosecutor wants to suggest that, oh, the phone could be in the same place and not moving and have a different location. These are device lock status. The device was unlocked, locked, unlocked at a particular time. What's happening on this phone at these particular times? We look at her hands. Her hands are covered in blood. If she got attacked at 1:24 or around that particular time, and she had blood on her hands, she would not be able to operate her phone efficiently. This looks like it's blood stains on the screen. What are those stains on the front of the screen? What are those stains on the front of the screen? And if any of us have ever tried to operate our phone with water on our hands, lotion on our hands, or any type of wet item on our hands, it makes it sometimes impossible to utilize the phone.
We've got more of the defense's closing arguments after the break. Keep it here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
The phone. All right, folks, before we head back to court, let's bring in trial and civil attorney and Temple University Law School professor Dante Mills. Dante, first and foremost, I think this is the first time I'm talking to you about this case. You know, this is a weird one. There are problems in the defense's story. The defendant took the stand. I had some issues there. There's certainly problems with the state's story, but I think it causes more problems for the state than it does for the defendant. I want to get your thoughts on that.
This is our first time talking about this case, and it's a very interesting case because you have a defendant who took the stand and admitted he was in the course of committing a crime when he saw a dead body. That's not usual. Usually defendants don't take the stand, and when they do, it's not to admit that they were committing crimes when this other crime occurred. But on the other side of this, with the prosecution, you have someone who confessed to this crime and is not the person that's on trial for murder. So both have really significant issues. And I agree with you 100%, Michael. It's the state who has the burden of proving this beyond a reasonable doubt. So if both sides have questions, it's the state that suffers.
But what about the fact that he lied about different things? And so how can a jury say, well, we're not going to believe those lies and we will believe these lies?
I agree with that, but I think this defense attorney is doing a fantastic job in this summation, kind of pointing out and walking through the scene as to why it would not make sense for this defendant to have committed this crime. When you look at things like valuables that were left around the apartment, like if it was a robbery, wouldn't you rob? Wouldn't you take something with you? Other things like the relationship and the type of wound shows that it may have been more of an emotional murder than just a happenstance. So I think there's a lot of things that's going on here. Yes, the defendant has problems, but I do think in this particular case, he had to take the stand because they could prove that he was committing crimes. But he's saying, yes, you got me here, but not for this murder. And I think it was very bold of him to take the stand to say that, and it was necessary for the jury to even choose to believe him if they want to. He gave them an option to say, all right, he at least admitted to us certain things. I know there were some problems with his story, but we also have this scapegoat here. We have this other person, the ex-boyfriend, who could have committed this crime, and it at least gives me an opportunity to question whether or not he's guilty. And if the jury has questions, they can't find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
And I think you add to that a shoddy investigation.
The fact that they never checked his alibi or anything like that, I mean, it just
problematic. Yeah,
how does someone confess to murder, take it back, and you never check to see where they were at the time?
That makes
you don't
no
do
sense.
testing of DNA and cuffs. It just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. Absolutely agree. All right, we're going to go back in. Defense attorney Brian Brown, he is continuing his closing argument. Let's get back into court.
Her camera comes on at 1:24. Was this an accident? Did she try to unlock her phone and accidentally put her camera on? The camera doesn't have an end time. So was the camera just on in the background? Was the camera just on? When the police got it, was the camera on? Because the camera never closed down. She operated the camera, which I believe was a mistake on trying to unlock the phone, and the camera never ended. Now, Detective Marco also testified to that she searched Aaron Pergamon's and Jeff Herbstman's phone. And in her opinion, there was nothing incriminating. Then when I asked her about Mr. Jackson-Bolanos, whether or not, like, you didn't find anything incriminating on his phone, she was like, oh, well, that is a subjective opinion. I can't give you my, but you gave your subjective opinion when he asked you. This didn't want to be truthful. Just want to steer this particular investigation in this particular trial on what the prosecutor wants, not being honest. She also stated that she remembers looking in the paper around the time that allegedly Jeff Herbstman was released from jail. She said she vividly remembers this. And then she was shown a newspaper article and said that refreshed her memory of when it happened. And then tried to suggest that Mr. Jackson-Bolanos had an attempt to do a same-day passport to flee the country? That's absurd. Guy Nutter, he indicated that he did not collect shoe impressions because the police basically tainted the scene. It was so much traffic in and out of this particular scene that he didn't collect any type of shoe prints. Is this a shoe print? Circle? Looks like one to me. Tony Grocery. Now, she stated that this jacket was quote-unquote water resistant, even though nowhere in her report that she indicated this, but she just conveniently gets on it the day of trial and says that, oh, I sprayed some Luminar on there, and therefore I determined that this jacket has some type of water-resistant qualities. What about the rest of his clothes? What about the rest? What about the hood that they took? What about his face garment that they had? What about his pants? What about his shoes? What about every other piece of garment? Were those also water-resistant? Why was any traces of blood on there? And obviously, this particular garment had to have some type of capability to have and absorb the blood, because they state, even though we can't see it with our naked eye, even though multiple people testified that they couldn't see this blood with the naked eye, but they said the blood was there. So obviously, this particular garment had to have some type of saturation. So it can't be 100% waterproof or resistant. We show markings on it right now. They're able to draw on this particular jacket. Obviously, this jacket had the type of material of which somebody could illustrate some drawings, some markings on there, and some type of absorbing on the sleeve of blood. Then we had Joni Johnson. Now, I believe the blood tells the story in this particular case. We already know that there's evidence of a struggle in the kitchen. This is where it started at, in the kitchen. Samantha Woll was not in the living room where this altercation started. Now, she may have ran to the living room in an attempt to maybe get her phone and being followed and pursued. This is the living room. What does their own experts say? The saturation and transfer stains of the living room rug and pillows indicated a blood-bearing object contacted these items following the bloodshed event. So what does that mean? That means there was a blood-shedding event. Blood left Samantha Woll's body, and then there was a transfer to the rug and pillow after, which would substantiate what forensic surgeon said, that it's a possible struggle inside of the living room because the blood happened first and then the pillow fell on top of the blood. The drip stains on the living room rug, couch, and footrest indicated a blood source moved through these areas. Pillows and blankets were observed on top of some of the blood stains on living room rug, indicating these objects were moved following the start of the bloodletting event. It was a tussle. This was a tussle inside of the living room. Pillows were being moved around, rugs were being moved around, blankets were being moved around after the bloodletting event, i.e. her stabbing, occurred. He shares this location with his girlfriend. They share the location together. So if she can see where I'm at any given time, why can't the police see where he was at that particular time? Why can't they pinpoint his GPS coordinates at that particular time? Why they got to go like, oh, he was just in the area? Very convenient, very convenient. Sergeant Lang, he didn't watch any videos before the interrogation. He had 10 minutes worth of information prior to the interrogation. Sergeant Ford indicated that, in fact, he provided Sergeant Lang those videos. So did Sergeant Lang just fail to watch them? To not do your homework prior to investigating and interrogating? Mr. Jackson-Bolanos also said that he held a gun before. He didn't know Samantha Woll was stabbed. He thought she might have been, because that's the #1 type of homicide in Detroit. It's a shooting. So he was like, hey, I didn't shoot nobody. I've held a gun before, but I've never shot. Detective Lang himself said that had Mr. Jackson-Bolanos indicated, hey, I didn't stab her, then yes, that would have raised his suspicion because she was stabbed. Or had Samantha Woll been suffocated to death, and he's like, oh, I never choked nobody out. That would have raised suspicion because he, in fact, said he didn't do what the very cause of that particular individual's homicide would have been. But Mr. Jackson-Bolanos, he didn't know how she died. He didn't know what the particular cause of that particular death was. Was it a stabbing? Was it a shooting? He didn't know that. He was honest with that. Sergeant Ford put him on guard that he didn't want to have anything to do with this. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. He understood that who he was, where he was, and where he came from as far as his background. Sergeant Ford also said that himself, like, we know your background. We've done our homework on you. This is somewhat out the character. You must have been working with somebody. No, I'm not working with nobody as far as no homicide. Maybe I have been working with others for some cars, but not for no homicide. To go into somebody's house and commit a murder and stab them 8 times? And where she was stabbed at, this was very strategic. Somebody wanted to kill her. She wasn't stabbed by somebody who's scared, who's just swinging and would have stabbed in the arm, maybe stabbed in the leg, stabbed in the stomach. This was all for the neck. And then after somebody was on top of her, stabbed her some more times. This was deliberate. This was a deliberate act, a crime of passion. This was not some just, oh, I'm walking in and I stumble across somebody and I get scared and I'm going to run against them and then I'm going to stab them multiple times. Absolutely not. Then we had the now officer in charge, Lieutenant Sanchez, who indicated that he became the OIC 5 days before trial on June the 5th, 2024, testified that he only collects clothing when there's visible smears and patterns of blood, even though Mr. Jackson-Bolanos was visible. He also indicated that if there's any type of contradiction between whether or not somebody touched the body, he may seize the clothes. We had a contradiction between Kevin Moore and Officer Dowd on whether or not that body was touched. And I'm not suggesting that Kevin Moore is the murderer, but to do a thorough analysis, especially for comparative reasons, and I guess maybe the prosecution wants to suggest, oh, us as defense, we could have went over to Kevin Moore's house and took his clothes and did our own independent analysis to determine whether or not he had blood on him. I guess they might come say that on everybody. Because they've already implied that, like, it's the defense's obligation to investigate and solve this case. Even though that picture looked like Jeff Herbstman, I think we may have. Where's the clothing of Jeff Herbstman? Like I stated, he indicated that had he known what Jeff Herbstman was wearing, he would have seized those clothes. Okay, how do you find out what he's wearing? You ask questions. You go interview people who at the synagogue and say, did you see Jeff on Friday? What was he wearing? He was wearing this? Okay, then we can go to his house and see if we find some similar clothing that match those descriptions. How else do we find out? We extract the video. He doesn't even know if there's video even at the synagogue. I'm pretty sure there probably is video at that synagogue, but they didn't take the time to pull that and extract that video because it didn't fit their narrative. Now, Jeff Herbstman, he was talking to his parents, and he also stated that, or was stated to him, that a friend of his, Martin or Marvin, he acted like he didn't know what I was talking about when I asked him, knows a judge, and that judge is working behind the scenes to get you released. We know judges